Sure.
Okay, so we're going to start the meeting while we get the technology going. We already had executive session, and we did the salute to the flag and the roll call in executive session. So we're up to the regular session. I just want to point out the statement of public notice in your agendas. There are 2 times during the meeting where the public is invited to speak. The first one is public comment on agenda items, if you have something to say or a question about something that's on the agenda tonight. And the second time is later in the meeting, which is public comment on non-agenda items, where you can come up and talk about any topic of your interest. If you do come up, there's a clipboard here, and you can put your name and address on there after you speak, but tell us your name and address when you come up, so we know who you are. The meeting is being recorded, and the rest of that you can read on your own. And tonight we're going to have a presentation on the long-term facility plan. So this is something that we do every year, where we go over, we have this long-term plan that gets updated every year, and Ms. McLaughlin kindly explains it to us every year, so we can see what's different and what's the same. So for some of us, it's just an update on the plan we've been looking at, and other people, it's kind of new. So.
Okay. So as Mrs. McCune indicated, this is our annual long-term facility plan update. We've been doing it for about 5 years now, 6. In August. Those who have not had it purchased before, I'm going to kind of briefly go over some of the background. The plan really began with a study that was done in late 2011 by the Spiegel Group, and at that time they also had KSI Consulting Engineering Firm work with them on this study because certain aspects of what they surveyed involved the mechanical, the electrical, and the other structural systems of the district other than the architecture. So, they looked at every school in the district. As I indicated, came up with an overall survey. It's a rather general type of document, but it identified a number of potential long-term capital needs, be they either capital maintenance or capital projects. Those were documented in this particular report, and the result of the report, sorry about that, generated a list of potential projects. Since that time, the board has added a number of items to those projects. And it seems like when you look at this, and I'm sure everybody's going to go right to the 154 identified projects, wow, that's a lot of projects. But there are an awful lot of them on there that are really small dollar types of maintenance things. So they might involve identifying replacement of partitions in bathrooms, in a couple of bathrooms in a building, and not every partition in every bathroom in a given building. So it's maybe a $5,000 item or a $2,000 item when you store repair to a flagpole. That's how detailed their report and survey was. But since December 2011, the issuance of the plan, we have 154 identified projects totaling $29 million plus dollars. I'll go through that in a little more detail as we get further on into this presentation. 58 of these projects, totaling $11.1 million, have been completed already since that time. Including the 10 projects which are in process this summer, there are a little under $15 million in projects that are in process or pending. I'm going to go through the detail of those as we go through this, including the 10 projects. So let me just speak to that for a moment. So a lot of times when we talk about prior meetings, as we always do, because we publicly contract for any construction project we're doing, which means we go out and we bid for it, and in accordance with the public school contracts law, and we publicly award that at a board meeting. We talk about a project. So, for example, this summer we talked about doing a door hardware project, but that really involves 6 buildings. So, when you look at this list, and because it's broken down by building, that's 6 projects. Okay. We are doing an HVAC project which completes phase 2 of the upgrades of the ventilation and also the AC addition to classrooms over the 300-400 wing at the William Annan School and a new building management software system over there. That, in terms of this list of projects, is really 3 projects, because the univentilator project is one project, the AC project is another project, and the controls were originally identified as a separate project. So in the original list that was put together by Spiesel, those were separate projects. So I want to give you some sense of how, what we think of maybe as one contract with one vendor to do a project at William Annan is really 3 in terms of this list and the way it was originally scheduled by Spiesel. So I'm not going to dwell on this. There are a lot of slides because since 2013 we've done a lot of work. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. We can go back. This will be posted on our website for anybody who really wants to go back and look at these lovely photos. But beginning in the summer of 2013, we had a number of significant projects which included this project here. We put new small group instructional classrooms over at Cedar Hill School. We did renovations to the annex. That entire annex was basically gutted and redone and refitted for a different mix of instructional space and staff office space and meeting space. We put a new generator in at this building as a result of Sandy. That was a lesson learned for us because our IT hub is now based here, and therefore we could stay up and running even if we had a much lesser problem in terms of just power being out in the grid. We could still service our telephone system from here and our internet access and that sort of thing. And we'd have an operations center that would be, this building would be a place where administration during Sandy, I remember we did a lot of building meeting kind of things and trying to do it off our phones. It's kind of a challenge. Paving projects we've done at Liberty Corner School, new foods room at William Annan. We replaced the turf in 2015 at Lee Field. We put a new wellness center in the summer of 15. And we did the first of our HVAC projects, which involved the high school, and you'll see in a minute it also involved Cedar Hill School. So we can show that. Summer of 16 we did the girls softball field. We did, in 2016 we did upgrades for security projects at each of the elementary schools. The most extensive, of course, had to be Cedar Hill School because of the way that building architecture is. When you walk in, you're immediately in hallways that can lead you to the cafeteria or down to the classrooms, which is a little different from the way the setup is in terms of the other buildings. So we had to do a little bit more in terms of reconfiguring the front office because of the way people need to be able to pass into that space, but not necessarily be able to get into the building itself. Then we had the Liberty Corner HVAC project, 2016 also. And we went on to do the Oak Street HVAC project, 2017. This stuff is really mostly of interest to people who are mechanical engineers, but it's there for you to see that we did it. Lee Field, we did the track. We resurfaced the track, put a new artificial track surface down in 2017, so 2 years after we took the turf down. 2018, we did a lot of flooring work over at Liberty Corner School, where we took out a lot of old carpeting, and we had to remove some of the subflooring, and we had a couple of spaces of classrooms on the lower level over at Oak Street that we did at the same time, and we put ECT down. In total, we had about 12 or 13 classrooms. That's something we did. We had some masonry repair onto the edifice here of Prospect School. And then also, not the edifice, excuse me, we were doing sidewalk repairs here. You can see that. So I think it was last summer when we did about 100 plus masonry projects, on a small scale like this, all at once around the district. We also did phase 1 of William Added from the HVAC project. I'm pleased to report that with this summer's project is the completion then of all of the HVAC SBA grants that we had. And all the projects. Here's a photograph. I didn't have a lot of photos because they all look the same after a while. You've seen one aerial unit with you've seen them all. This is phase 2. We had to put in new electrical panels and support, obviously, service for these. And then the newest item to our list, and it was on there last summer, we had an addition to the high school. This is a very preliminary sketch of what the layout might look like. It's at the end of the 700 wing, immediately adjacent to the parking lot, the student lot. We're talking about 2 floors here, which is roughly 10,000 square feet. We're still early, we're still in the design phase, but just wanted people to have something to look at that. So now what we have here, and I'm going to kind of skip through these 6 pages. It'll be on the website, you can look at it. We have broken down by every building all of the projects, the 154 projects, and they fall basically into a number of columns here. The first column is really what the original construction estimates were that we had from Spiegel Group. The second column in green is everything that's been completed through last summer. And then what we have in blue are the current projects this summer. The first one would be those projects that are it's broken down between the SDA grants and those that are non-SDA. And these are the projects that we're paying for out of our budget, meaning there's no grant matching funds. This column over here are those in which we have money that we set aside in reserves that we had to have and show to the state at the time we applied for the grants, and that are matched by the state up to 40% of the cost. They pay 40%, we pay 60%. What you have here, and here, here, and here are the remaining projects that we have out here. This one in amber is the remaining one SDA grant project that we have, which is the Oak Street roof. That is a grant that's out there. And then we have here what we call direct install projects. And those are projects that we think are potentially eligible for some sort of potential financial offset, but we can't, it depends on how often the state wants to renew the program. So we took advantage of that a few years ago when we put upgraded lighting and sensors into the Oak Street School. We've done something similar over at Cedar Hill. And what we get is, in those cases, when the Board of Public Utilities has that money available in trust that they have set aside, they open it up every so often and they will fund it at a ratio of 70 cents on every eligible dollar. So those are there basically identified as funding source hopefully to open up. And what you have out here in terms of the other projects are basically everything else that falls into, you know, not one of the preceding categories. It's a catch-all category, basically. The biggest thing out there is the addition to the high school. And then in this one in blue, when I went over the Robin, sorry, I skipped over this one, Robin's Egg blue. Basically what you've got there is the science lab renovation over at the William Manning Middle School. That's the big ticket item. But I'm gonna get to a slide that kind of recaps the big ticket items, because what you're gonna see is that the bulk, while there's a large number of items out there, the dollar volume that's out there in terms of remaining projects of 14+ million is really largely represented by about 9 projects. So let me kind of, this is there for those who want to follow through on the spreadsheet, but I think this is going to be more readily followed by most people. As I indicated, as of August of this year, we have $14.8 million in progress and pending. And we have identified assets, offsets of, of 3.9 million, or they will be generated. So either identified or generated. So here's how that breaks down. We have $281,000 in the current fiscal year 19-20 budget. And that really is the $179,000 that we have set aside for the door hardware projects that we are doing in the 6 buildings throughout the district right now this summer. I'm pleased to report, contrary to what I knew on Wednesday when I met with the board, that as of Thursday, as a result of our conversation with the contractor on Tuesday, the contractor came in on Friday, and now we'll have those projects done by this Friday. In addition to that, we have in there the curtain wall repair project. So right now, as part of the HVAC contractor's contract over there at William Manning, he also has what was an alternate to the project, which was to repair the curtain wall on the backside of the 300 and 400 wing that faces out onto where the utility access is, where you have basically those gas lines running behind the building there. And that was $104,000 alternate, basically. So that's what's in 281. Then we have 918,000 plus in SDA grants. So the SDA grants, meaning the School Development Authority grants, which are the 40% match grants for the eligible projects, which are the HVAC project being completed this summer, and the outstanding SDA project, which is the, I previously mentioned, which is the Oak Street School project, on the old original core building over at Oak Street. We have $811,000 in capital reserves that's already been transferred out for the HVAC project that's going on right now. And then there is, and has been since we started this plan, always the anticipation that we would need to generate reserves going forward. If you go back to 5 or 6 years ago, the number that we had to generate per year was significantly larger. Right now, we're looking at needing reserve generation of about $490,000 a year for the next 4 years to meet all the outstanding projects. At one point, we were closer to $1 million a year, so it significantly dropped. And that's because we've completed projects, and we've completed projects under budget, and we've also retooled some projects. So, for example, the William Manning School curtain wall project was originally thought to be identified by Spiegel as a replacement of the entire wall, and it's going to be a $1.4 million project. It's costing us $104,000 to repair it. It's a significant savings. Those monies are reallocated, obviously, within the plan, as you can see. Projects in progress and pending, less the aforementioned total to 10,843,000. That doesn't make a whole lot of difference to most people here until we get to the next slide, which is this slide. So of that 14,000,008 that's out there in progress and pending, 77% of it is represented by the projects you see here. The 411,000 represents the remaining door hardware projects that we're going to do, because in this phase of door hardware projects, we only identified those doors which had fire ratings that required us to have by code a different type of lock set on it, because we were prohibited without the extension or waiver that we got from the fire code official from using the emergency magnetic strips that we have on the doors in case of a lockdown scenario. But we do have and have identified that there's some 500 or so doors throughout the district that we'd like to bring up to the same spec in terms of hardware, so that we had a common piece of hardware and new contemporary ADA hardware throughout the district. The Oak Street Roof project, you've heard me mention that a few times already. The second half of the William Adam project is on there. As I've mentioned, we're doing that right now. The Science Lab project is a $1 million project to do some conversions and upgrades to labs over in the 300 and 400 wing of William Adam Middle School. And then you have the Ridge High School addition project, which we showed you the slide for earlier, but which was first mentioned last summer. And then we've got the Ridge High School varsity complex drainage project, which was identified, I think after the Spiesel project, correct Nick, but separately by the district for the use of the civil
Around the same
engineer.
time,
Right.
around 2010.
Right. So the projects with the ASERIS are 40% funded with SDA grants, as I've mentioned a few times already, which means that the district share of these projects is $10,317,000. And if you recall, I'm sorry, 517. Well, that's what happens when you don't have glasses on. Sorry, 517. And remember, I said that we had reserves available pending at 843. So we have enough right now to do all of these projects with the reserves that we have. So that's the takeaway from this. I'm sorry about the pop-ups. I have to talk. Is the IT director here? Because I have to bring to his attention that I've asked him about getting this. Thank you. We always have, we've had a number of projects over the years that have been added to the list that weren't originally on the list. And these are some of those projects, just for those who haven't seen the presentation before. So, when we started out, the list was, and I should have added in here the addition piece, I didn't, but I think that's pretty obvious. That's like the elephant, no pun intended, that these are all things that weren't part of the original 2011 survey, but that have been completed already. And then, well, that's why I'm gonna post it on the website. I can't read it either, I remember, I wrote it. So, I think the challenge for us here is always, as much as we know, we're constantly evolving and upgrading this plan and discussing with the board, what are the, operational and instructional needs of the district. And, the board was very proactive in terms of, its funding of these reserves. We've been doing that since 2012, which has allowed us to do these things without, adding to the district's debt structure, without, adding to the taxpayers' load in terms of the tax levy related to the debt structure. And at the same time, the board has been proactive in its policies with respect to, funding future offsets of the, lost the last slide, of the existing debt. So, the district's ability to realize additional savings on each project that's been implemented has been, as I said before, has allowed us to kind of leverage and move forward and add these additional things in, basically. And as I also indicated, the amount set aside for the reserve, which is easier for us to meet now, has significantly decreased as a result of that combination of things. That's the presentation. I mean, I know that I ran through it quickly, but a lot of folks, as I look around the room, have probably seen those photos before. That's the bulk. The takeaway here is that, you know, with the exception of the addition for the high school, which was there for the first time in this presentation, if you care to look back last year, there really haven't been any other significant material changes to this plan. It's really about tracking and whether our funding has been able to stay on track with the board's priorities in terms of projects that we're going to accomplish. And you know, I'm pleased to say that at this point, it would appear that we don't need financing for that project. We're now the big project, the addition that we're now officially undertaking for the board's blessings to begin. Any questions from the board?
So under superintendent's report, there are two items. Would someone like to make a motion on item 1, which does require a vote? Linda and Tim. Want us to vote on that first?
Sure.
Okay, so can we have a roll call for that, please?
This is the one with Harvard and the different places?
Yeah, the forensics one.
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer?
Yes.
I'm sorry, did it?
I said yes.
I'm sorry. Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Sam?
Yes.
Mrs. White?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Waldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McKeon? Madam President?
Okay, so now we're up to the Ridge Master Schedule.
Okay, so, Mr. McLaughlin, yeah, looks like you're disconnecting. Let's see, talk about glasses, right? It's terrible. Who's got their readers laying around? Okay, so, you don't need to look at me.
Where did you discuss this update?
Yeah, those were just Cokes. They were just Cokes. Yeah, that was my dad's 70th birthday.
Yeah.
So, anyway, thanks for coming on a August evening. I appreciate everybody being here. Before I start on a quick update on some things we've been working on with the Ridge Master Schedule, I just wanted to kind of give you a brief update on opening, how things are looking. I've had an opportunity to get through most of the schools a little bit. They're looking excellent from a facility perspective. I know that the grounds crew is still working hard to get things ready for our curb appeal, as they say, on the opening day of school. And as Mr. McLaughlin mentioned, they are wrapping up the project over at William Allen. But I did get a chance to walk through all the rooms. I know that Mr. McLaughlin's planning on doing that tomorrow, and all the air conditioning was running when I was there, so things were looking good. the principals are reporting that they're ready to go. And I know that today we started to issue the student assignments, the teacher assignments for kids, and the master, the student schedules for students. So I anticipate hearing about how that went by morning, but from what I'm hearing so far, for the most part, things seem to be going out fairly well. And I just wanted to say thanks to everybody that works over the summer. You know, I know Sean is, you know, still scrambling, trying to get those last minute resignations. You know, sometimes people move on or get married and move away, or their spouse gets a job somewhere else and they're a last minute resignation. And so Sean's been working really hard to get those positions filled. And as you heard from Rod, he's been working really hard to get facilities in good shape. So I just wanted to thank these guys. Kristen is not here today. She couldn't be here. Actually, her daughter got married over the weekend, so
Oh, wow.
she had a big event, and she tried to get back from where she was, but wasn't able to get here in time for the board meeting. She has been working really hard with a lot of the folks that are here tonight, actually, working on Genesis, rolling out the new student information system. She's been working super hard with Alex Blinder, our director of IT. He and his staff, George Amberishko and Maureen Bernard, have been working really hard to get that rolled out. So I'm just really proud of the team. They've done a tremendous amount of work to get school ready, so hopefully things are really going along well by the time the students show up. As we finish off the last little things in the next week we have to work. Michael Fackelman, he's here tonight. Drew, Stephanie Smith, they've all been working really hard on the master schedule at Ridge, which, you know, had some different wrinkles to it as always with each year, but also the fact that they learned Genesis and really did the whole schedule in a whole new SIS is a big challenge, and so I just want to thank them. They've also been coming to a lot of board meetings, as you've noticed, to try to keep us up to speed on what we're thinking about with respect to schedule options. That's why Tom's been coming too. As you know, the science department has a big hurdle when they're looking at how to schedule all the science labs and the impact that that has. So I just wanted to thank you guys, you know, just for the extra time coming to board meetings and all the work that I know you guys did over the summer, and hopefully that comes out roses when the students come back next week. So just thanks everybody for the hard work. I really appreciate the support in getting things ready for our kids. But that being said, we're feeling good about our upcoming opening, and wanted to take a little bit of time, as I've mentioned to the board, and a couple times I think in communication to the public. We know that we've undertaken a lot with respect to our strategic plan and some of the goals that we have going forward over the next several years. And so we want to try to have some updates at each Board of Ed meeting. A little bit on the lighter side in the summer. We want to give more when folks are back in town. But just the same, we wanted to talk a little bit about our thoughts for the addition that Mr. McLaughlin alluded to a little bit already tonight, and some of the scheduling things. And one of the things we talked about, I was reminded, was we talked about developing a Q&A. So I started working on getting that started, and I just wanted to kind of use that as a way to share with you some of the things we've been working on, and wedding in 2017. Not my kids, those were my kids, but they weren't getting married. My niece got married. Anyway, so we started to kind of get a list going here, and you know, it's certainly not at all comprehensive. We know that we'll be adding to it, but it's a kind of a shared doc that I've got going with the admin team, and as questions come to us, we can work on adding to it. and we'll get this posted on the website starting tomorrow. So some of these questions have kind of been out there a little bit, wanted to kind of, document them so people could refer back to them. One of the simple questions that we've had is we've talked about different kinds of schedules for the high school, and basically two different versions. One that we've been emphasizing largely has been the rotating drop schedule, and the other one that we've looked at is an alternating AB day, but both of them have the same scenario in terms of the number of classes that the students would be able to take, which is the same as they're running now. The kids have 8 classes plus a lunch period, so they have 9 periods, if you will, in the schedule at Ridge. Now, what we're looking at is also 8 class periods plus a unit lunch is what we've been looking at. So they would still have the same opportunities as they do now. What about the VOTEC? Certainly we want to continue the same services that we've already established with the VOTEC, so anything that we put forward would have the students still being able to do part-time, half-day, or full-day at the Somerset County VOTEC. This question about special needs students relative to longer classes, if we ran 57-ish minute classes or even on a full day, a full block scenario of 84 minutes. Obviously, we know that that's an issue that we need to spend a lot of time working on professional development with our staff, as I think it's relevant for all of the students with special education or not. But also we know that we do have opportunities in some of our self-contained programs to kind of create customized schedules, which are currently being developed under the current system. This was an interesting question. I was thinking about this one a little bit, and I'm gonna ask our district architect to take a look at this one a little bit. Would it be a problem during lunches, students using the bathroom? I thought about this a little bit, and without getting into like the timing of different people's bodily functions, I know that it's working now, and the kids are in the building all day, and when they need to go to the bathroom, they go to the bathroom. So I don't anticipate that this is going to be a huge issue, but I do understand if you have everybody kind of, free, quote unquote, free during a unit lunch, it's worth considering. So we will take a look at that. This question has come up really over the past several years. Different folks have asked about this issue, and certainly we're well aware, as I like to say, people were well aware of the issues with regard to high school start times, what the research has to say about adolescents and our teenagers relative to getting up at the crack of dawn to go to school, and I know that this is something actually that the state has done some research on. They've published their findings, which are consistent, not surprisingly, with the medical research, saying that it'd be really great if you could try not to ask those high schoolers to show up before 8:30. That being said, are we thinking about that? Are we looking at that? And the answer is yes, we are looking at it. Obviously, it's something that we need to have a lot of conversation about and take a look at. I've already done some preliminary work in asking the transportation folks at the Somerset County Ed Services Commission that handles our transportation to kind of take a look at what they think about different scenarios that I proposed to them in terms of possible bell schedules, just to see from a feasibility perspective, could they flip some of our busing around if we wanted to get the high school students in later instead of earlier. So they're taking a look at that, not really seriously until the fall after they have busing kind of smoothed out for September and October. Oh, right, so one of the questions, sure, there's a few very significant issues with respect to this type of challenge when it comes to what districts have to kind of grapple with. One of the issues that Mrs. McKeon was just mentioning was, what happens with transportation is often that you have multiple vendors covering your routes. So if you have a school district that has 60 bus routes, depending on how transportation is being handled, that might involve 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different vendors that are going to bid, if you will, or being awarded the bid for different routes. And so if you conceive of an entirely new approach to busing, and you have to go back out to bid, if you will, because you're changing what you're asking for in a material way, you don't have the ability to just necessarily simply renew an existing contract and you're going back out to bid. A couple things could happen. One, you're going to have to deal potentially with the challenge of getting all the work done with multiple vendors, which could be complex and a challenge for them if they're providing services in other districts that are on a completely different schedule than you're asking to switch to. And the other issue could be financial, in that if you have to go back out to bid for all of your routes, it's an opportunity for the service providers to recognize the need and price it completely differently, because you're asking for something that's significantly different than what they're currently doing. So there's a logistical challenge and a potentially financial challenge in those situations. In our case, we have essentially been working with one provider, and so that may be less of an issue. I don't have to go to 8 different people and say, hey, you know, if we wanted to do this, what would you think about it from a feasibility perspective? For the most part, our routes are handled by the Somerset County ESC. So that challenge is maybe not quite as difficult for us, and we're able to ask them to look at it. The other pieces that go along with that item number 5 have to do with things associated with staff, the challenge for staff. What does it mean for the staff if you have a significant change in the start time in their lives? That can be a challenge to work through. It can also be a challenge for families, of course, depending on their own personal schedules. An hour one way or another, you know, is a significant change for a lot of people, and some people have more flexibility than other people in making that work. So obviously childcare becomes an issue in that case. And if you're relying on older students to watch younger students and you flip schedules around, how does that play out? When do the older students get home? When do the younger students get home if you make some flips in the timing of high school student schedules? So those are just a few of the bigger issues that we should be talking about as we think about this. But when you think about the idea of having a significant change to the way we do the schedule at Ridge High School, it only makes sense to think about, if we're going to look at this seriously, that may be the time to make that change as well. So that's why I included it here in this list. We had a question about science instructional time in comparison to other districts. We know, as we've looked at the master schedule, and as Tom and the staff at Ridge have been and taking a look at the amount of time that we use for instruction, it's been a very interesting journey. I think we've really grappled with this, not just this year, but really off again, on again for 5 or 6 years. We've really been looking at this issue. It represents some really interesting philosophical conversations about what you value and how you use time to relate to what you value. And when you look at the amount of time dedicated to some of our science classes, you know, the question we have is, you know, as we revisit this issue, is that where we want to be? Do we want to dedicate this amount of time to the school day where extra periods are going towards certain science classes and they're not going to other classes? So it's represented some really interesting conversations about value and equity and impact to the master schedule. If you came to the meeting in July, you'll remember that a lot of our conversation that we had was surrounding how the way we get the master schedule done for science impacts all of the other content areas, impacts the way we're able to balance classes, impacts the way electives are scheduled, the way PE is scheduled, the way study hall is scheduled, and kind of the hoops that we have to go through in order to make it all work. So one of the questions I know that came up, and Tom was, I have to thank Tom, he was good enough to kind of just do some legwork. Obviously not 100% complete, that just means we didn't get some answers from some people yet. It's not, there's no slighting anyone here. This is just some of the information that Tom was able to collect from some districts, and you know, I just threw it in this Q&A, and you can see for yourself, as he kind of took a look at a bunch of other districts. He looked at sort of what was the average amount of time in minutes that was being dedicated to each type of course. over a school year. And that's kind of in the darker blue there, and then the lighter green is where we are here in Berners Township. And I believe this question came up last month, and Tom collected some information about it. He also made a note about the type of schedule that they were running as he was looking at these other schools. So I just want to thank Tom for grabbing this information, working on this for us. And RDS means rotating drop schedule, which is one of the schedules we've been emphasizing to take a look at. And roughly half of these school districts are using that at their high school. The majority of the others are using the traditional schedule, with a couple school districts using the AB block. So that gives you some insight on that issue. So then the project itself, how's it going? Again, Mr. McLaughlin alluded to the financial aspects of this just a little bit ago. He had some preliminary drawings, and I want you to know that more work has been done on the drawing and the design phase, obviously, since the very preliminary sketches. I just threw this slide up there to sort of give you the Google Earth view, right? This is the corner of the D parking lot, the upper parking lot. And as Mr. McLaughlin mentioned, this is the 700 wing. This is the end of the 700 wing. This down below is the end of the 500 wing. And the addition that we're talking about would occupy this space in here. And behind it in this area would likely be the driveway / a little bit of parking to be accessed, we think, with kind of an extension through this corner of the parking lot. That's still being evaluated, the best way to handle the civil engineering to access that space. So that gives you a sense of kind of the overview of where this would go. This is some added detail just so that you know that it is being worked on. What that is the first floor, which is the kitchen facility and the serving area. All of this stuff that is difficult to see is essentially the detailed numbering of all the appliances and where they would position the different appliances. And each of these items is spec'd out with a number so that you can call out exactly what equipment goes where. They're working on the details of that. This is the connection to the existing hallway in the 700 wing. And then down in the corner where the hallway extends into the 500 wing, this shows another pathway into the space so that there'd be a little bit better flow possible through the space by having an entrance, which would really be an entrance only here, and an exit out in this area. So they're working at it, right? They're working at it. And just a quick view of the upstairs. Some more detail has been added there, but that was basically the basic same design that was in the slide Mr. McLaughlin shared, showing the 4 classrooms with a small either office or teacher workroom on the second floor. This space mirroring, if you will, being directly above this space. The 2 boxes are one box right on top of the other as a second story. Okay. So as I said, this is kind of an update to let you know that we're working on the questions, the Q&A as we get them, and as we can share more information and add to it. Certainly we'll add it to this document and have continuing dialogue going forward. Now, I did want to mention one other thing, and that was that Drew was kind enough to do a little bit of work kind of digging into a unique issue that is not unique per se to the addition to Ridge High School or per se to a new master schedule at Ridge, but it is an ongoing issue that we've dealt with at the high school for some time, and that is option 2 as a scheduling process. And so I just asked Drew, I said, look, let's just try to share a little bit on this topic. Obviously, everyone is familiar with option 2 at the high school, and the fact that we have many students who, in lieu of a physical education class, not in lieu of health, but in lieu of physical education, they have what we call off-site PE, where they earn credit by doing a physical activity off-site or by being part of a program in the Ridge Sports area at the high school. So we're kind of looking at this as we think about the high school schedule because, how do we accommodate this now and how do we accommodate it going forward? And so I wanted to kind of share this with the board because I know that we spent a lot of time at the July board meeting talking about, if you remember, the whole conversation with periods 2, 5, and 8, right? So I asked the gang to kind of be here again as we just talk about this a little bit more because they're neck deep, if you will. It's fresh in their memories of how things are going with scheduling at Ridge right now. And this is kind of like one of the last layers that gets entered in. If you can imagine having the master schedule essentially built and then having to kind of handle that last curveball, you say last curveball, hopefully the last curveball, that comes in, bearing in and hard down on the hands as you stand it back, right? It's coming in last and hard. And it's trying to manage the accommodations to make everybody's option 2 schedule work. So, I asked them to just put together a few slides, and I don't think I need to ask them to jump in at the moment, but if you have questions, they're at the ready. But kind of gives you a little bit of sense of just what happened in marking period 1, right? Marking period 1. This is about the first marking period because we're looking at it, multiple cycles to make it through option 2 the whole year. So I said, just kind of lay out a quick example of how this impacts the scheduling a little bit. So here's an example of what can happen. In the first marking period, you have a class set up with 35 students and a teacher, and then option 2 comes along, and 30 of those students are now leaving the class and going to a study hall. So now the teacher has 5 students. Okay, so obviously you're not going to run a PE class with 5 students, which means start moving, right? Start balancing. This is that act of balancing. So you're getting the schedules finished, and now before you can publish schedules, obviously you have to get things in a better shape balance-wise because the sections need to be as balanced as you can make them. And this is one of the challenges that you have in a master schedule that has a lot of curveballs, okay? It makes it harder and harder every time you add a layer in to have that natural mathematical smoothness that you try to achieve, right? And that smoothness allows you to say, we have 5 sections of course X and 100 students in it. We're going to put 20 in each. And we're going to make sure that they're not misbalanced on gender too. Okay? That smoothness that you want to be able to have. Every time you add a curveball, a singleton, something like option 2, it adds to that challenge in trying to make that all work. Because this in and of itself doesn't necessarily seem like a problem, but then you got to go and find kids to put into that class and balance it out. And how does that impact all of their electives, where they are, what's available, who can you move, who can you not move? So it creates another level that when you dovetail that with the restrictions that we have in science that we talked about last month with periods 2, 5, and 8, because of the way the labs dovetail into those 3 periods, it makes for some scheduling gridlock, I guess might be a good way of describing it. Jump in if you think I can describe it better, or you could describe it better. But
and this is a specific example of what
yeah.
really happens with a senior health class, because in paragraph 2 it says marking period 2, the same 30 students don't take option 2. They're in health.
Right.
Well, now they have to go back with that teacher.
Right.
And of course, that teacher now has 25 students because it was rebalanced. Add the 30 students in,
Right.
it's one teacher now with 55 kids.
right,
And you really can't go back and rebalance them out because they're locked into their English, their math, their science, their history classes.
Right.
And it really creates a problem
Right.
in terms of having a good balanced schedule.
right, right. And so a lot of this comes down to timing too, right? When does the information become available? And some of the information becomes available after you can no longer make changes, as Drew just described, for other reasons. Because you're not gonna pull kids out of a full year course to balance them by putting them in a different period, right? Once the school year is going, that's not really an option, right? And when these new things get introduced after the fact of being able to change other things, you have to just deal. And so, you know, I asked the team to kind of try to share something that would help highlight that, because it's an important consideration if we're trying to build a better mousetrap in the end, right? Because that's the goal. We're trying to build a better mousetrap for 21, 22. And this is something that warrants some real consideration. And I think this is kind of highlights this in a way that maybe is a little bit easier to see than the paragraph. It's sort of the table presentation of the prior paragraph. What happens marking period 2? This is what you were talking about with respect to health, having to bring the kids back in. And this was a timeline about how different people have to do different things in order to try to make option 2 work going through marking periods 2, 3, and 4. This is what I was trying to say. It's not just a, hey, we gotta fix this. Yeah, it's not just fixing it at the end of August, right? It's fixing it 3 more times. So. You want to talk about this at all, Drew, or Tom? 2, 5, and 8. I think it kind of jumps out.
Well, yeah, that's, of course, you can see that most of the PE health section fall into those, the 2, 5, and 8 periods. You know, all the other, because you can't really schedule, because of the labs, any core classes there generally, and maybe some electives. So most of the health and PE and the study halls start occurring 2, 5, and 8 because of the lab restriction. And you can see by the numbers on the bottom, the totals, I bolded them because it's somewhat stark.
Right, right, because you're trying to allow those kids to have PE during those periods when they could be pulled for their lab once a week. Right.
Or study.
Or study hall.
And then to couple into that, what I was mentioning to Drew, is you look at that, you know, grade 9, 101 kids, second period. They have lab, some of them Monday, some of them Tuesday, some of them Wednesday, some of them Thursday. So as you start to look at what your roster looks like, you might be a teacher of those 35 kids once it's balanced, but those 35 kids aren't all there all week long.
Right.
Different kids are missing Monday, different kids are missing Tuesday, and so on. Which is why we made the decision to manipulate and force that everybody's there on Friday to add some sense of closure.
Once a week. Once a week I have my class.
You have everybody on Friday.
Yes. Right. So it's not, look, it's not about, no one's trying to like cry boo-hoo, doom and gloom, right? It's just trying to establish the reality of some of the biggest challenges that we want to try to make better if we're going to go through this process, right? If we're going to go through this process, can we come up with something that creates a better scenario in a lot of ways, not just rotating drop, which is great, right? You know, all the benefits that we've talked about with respect to, you know, students not always having the same class first period, students being able to have a unit lunch, students being able to eat lunch with their friend, students not always having the last period every day, students being able to have, you know, less due the next day for classes because you're only seeing, you know, 6 classes each day instead of 8. You know, all those benefits that we've talked about, they're great, but what else, if we're going through this, what else can we take a look at? So that's all it is. It's really just sharing some of the nitty gritty, not to bore you with the challenges of scheduling at Ridge High School, but we think it warrants some consideration going forward as we continue to work on this. So anyway, thanks for putting that together, Drew. Did you want to add anything else to that?
Well, again, if you have, like, for instance, the AV day, you wouldn't have to pigeonhole labs in any given period, like Tom has to do now, they're within the class.
Right.
Or if you have a rotating drop schedule, you wouldn't have to have a designated lab period, it would just pull partially out of each lunch when that
Right.
period rotates back to the lunch.
Right.
So again, you wouldn't be setting up that 3-column scenario that we're sort of stuck with now with a 9-period day. And correct me if I'm wrong, Tom,
Yes, you're completely correct, and it increases room usage. Current system, I get 6 periods, if you recall from July, on either the AB or the RDS, you get 8 periods of usage out of those, so. Either one of those outcomes produces better usage with less constraint on the rooms.
Right. So this is a slide from, one of the slides from the presentation that the team made in July, where we were talking about rotating drop and taking some extra time out of the unit lunch when students' science class backs up to lunch, whether it be on the front half of lunch or perhaps period 4 on the back half of the lunch period. So, you know, doing things that way would give us an opportunity to schedule the classes using all 8 periods rather than just 6, and hopefully to help have more ability to smooth out some of these issues. So at this stage, you know, the smiling on the one hand is having more or less finished schedules for the 19-20 school year, and then you know, on the next sentence, I'm asking the team to start working on a draft schedule for something that doesn't exist yet, and that probably has me in a little bit of trouble, but we do want to take a look at how to mock that up, and so we want to try to mock it up in a way that I think our first pass, what we're advocating for, is this scenario where we have labs coming out of lunch for half, roughly 20 to 30 minutes out of the lunch period, to see what we can do in a mock-up schedule and how that helps us in terms of scheduling the rooms. So that's kind of where we're headed next. Sorry, guys. Mike, keep smiling. All right. Anything else before we close this piece?
Nick, I just wanted to
Yeah,
add
sure.
one new wrinkle that came up this year because of the large numbers of option 2 was the amount of study halls that we had increased.
Right.
And the increase in staff in the study halls, and trying to be creative to find where we put more study halls and make them happen. So that was bigger this year than it had been in previous years.
Right, so less and less kids in a gymnasium, more kids in a study hall, so having, even if it's a duty
Right,
for
right.
staff to
Exactly.
monitor the study hall, and then a place to hold the study hall. Because, you know, I know we're using the cafeteria when we can, and then when we can't, we're in the lecture halls.
So we're using the cafeteria 1, 2, 3, and 9 primarily, and then lecture halls in addition, well, lecture halls during lunch periods. So it's looking like this year we're actually using the lecture halls period 2 now as well. So I think there's a couple hundred.
Even with the cafeteria, you can't
Even
put them
with
all.
cafeterias, and then that required, because of the large numbers that we're putting in there, you can't just put one teacher.
Right,
It's
right.
two.
So then the teachers get a little stretched to get duties covered. Yep, yep. All right, well, thanks. Thanks for being here, and thanks for sharing that, Drew. I appreciate you passing that up the line to me, because I wanted to tack it into our conversation.
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank you guys for all that work, because I mean, I've been paying attention to this issue for like how many years now, and like I'm learning all this stuff, like, you know what? Like I sort of knew it was that complicated, and board members would say, why can't we just run mock schedules of all these different things, and then we'll see what one we like. So I
Yeah, it's funny.
appreciate the detail, even though it's
It's a
confusing.
lot like a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, but the pieces change,
Yeah.
and that's what we're going for. We
But I mean,
felt
my
pretty good.
impression of it is it makes me much more excited about these other schedules because we were tackling these other issues that we were sort of aware of, but not all the way out there. So, we're now up to public comment on agenda items. If anyone has comments or questions, tell us your name and address when you come up, and then you can sign in afterwards. Is there anyone for public?
Yeah, I'm not, so, Mary McRae, I live at 7 Quincy Road. Nick, I would never expect you to speak on behalf of other superintendents, so I'm not sure if you can answer this question, but, people are going to ask, have already asked, or will continue to ask, if, you know of other schools that are considering changing starting and ending times, and how it would impact our sports. Like if our school day goes 8 to 3:15, another school goes till 2:30, like, will that impact any sports schedule?
Okay.
I don't even know if you can answer that.
Material, 46 Dykeman Place. Okay, just notes that I made while I'm sitting here. Start times, I'm glad you're considering that. I know it's been a big discussion for a lot of parents in this town. So it's low hanging fruit, and they're not sure why we didn't do that first. So I just appreciate that you're considering that. There was, on NewJersey.com, they had something out where the state is doing a pilot for 5 schools. So that's interesting, that it's kind of good timing for us to see what those schools end up doing, or how it works for them, what doesn't work, work makings out there. So I'm really appreciative, I'm sure a lot of people in the community are, that that's something that you're considering, even if it will go in my son's senior year, good for the kids if it goes in and it works with the scheduling changes. So I just wanted to say. The addition. I'm not sure, I've been at all these meetings for like the last 5 years. Are there gonna be 2 cafeterias? Is that what the addition is, or is that the new cafeteria and the old one's gone? Just to clarify, because I'm not sure. I see the new one, but I don't know what that means. I know there's been a lot of questions in the community also about the money. I'm glad we have the money for it, but it's been said that the money's been put away slowly over the last 7 years or whatever, so that, considering this, because I know for years we've been talking about the drop schedule, so I know this is something that we've been kind of planning towards, and I've always asked, where are we going to find the money, or are we going to go to the parents? I think that's a little concerning to people, because like last year, teachers didn't have sinks working, air conditioning isn't working on the upper levels of Ridge High School, but yet we're putting money away. I know people complain about things at Williams and other schools also. So I know that's been said, and I wanted to bring that up. It's just a question from the community, that if we're putting this money away, it seems like to me for good reason. I've been keeping an open mind on it. But the basic needs of the teachers got to come first. That's where the money should go. Never a question. And then, one question for boosters. If you're going to add rooms to the school, if this actually goes through and down the line, we would love, I'm going to look at Mr. Kraus for a minute, we would love to have a room, a closet bigger than the one we have now for inventory. So if, I know you're shuffling things around and teachers need, spaces too, but if you find space in there somewhere for boosters to have a bigger place for inventory, would be great. I'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you very much for hearing me out. And Genesis, I think, is done here.
Oh, good.
Is there anyone else for public comment on agenda items?
Sure. So other schools, what are they doing with sports? So I talked to actually our athletic director, Mr. Shell, about this, it must have been last week. And I know that Princeton last year was their first year. I believe they made their high school start time 8:20, does that sound about right? It was about 8:20. So we're trying to reach out to them to get some feedback on how it went for them. My take on it, in talking to Mr. Shello, just sort of anecdotally, was that probably not too big an issue for home events. It's that travel piece. So when there are events that students are competing, and lights may or may not be available, it could depend on the district. Where are they going for the game? What's the field or the surface that they're playing on? Is it a lit facility or not? And how that would play out with respect to when kids would have to leave school, right? So they may have to miss the last period. If the last period's 57 minutes, they're basically missing the last hour of school potentially. So that was kind of our initial conversation about how that would likely need to go. And there could be some things, we know there are a few things, a few events that he was talking about even now where kids are leaving maybe an hour early. So, how does that play out if you're leaving later, swim team, he mentioned, he did mention the swim. So, and it just depending on where you're going, right? Some things are further, obviously, than others. So other superintendents, and I know that there is the pilot. I actually communicated with the executive county superintendent today about the pilots and the 5. They're looking for 5 school districts, I think, to partner with to look at piloting the delayed or the later high school start time. And I just said to him, well, you know, we're looking at it here in Berners, if you wanna tell them that we're talking about it, we certainly have no definite plan, so I mentioned that to him, because I was aware of the pilot, and I know that, Bridgewater's talking about, the same issue. I just talked to their superintendent today. You know, they're looking at it as well, pretty seriously, trying to see if they might be able to do something sooner or later. I'm not exactly sure what their timing might be, but they're talking about it pretty seriously there in Bridgewater as well. So, you know, and one of the things that you know, probably would make a good topic for, you know, maybe one of the county school boards meetings is to talk about it kind of on a county level, because you know, making the change with a couple or, you know, 1 or 2, 3 districts over time, you know, it's not that that's necessarily not doable, but it might make it easier if more schools together were doing it, and it was a little more coordinated, but I'm not sure that it will happen that way. If